Welcome back for another edition of the Final Mile. We're going to answer your questions. We've got one of our listeners sent us an email a week or so ago, and we promised to break it down for him on the show today. And we've got a couple other questions that came from our Facebook community. So make sure you're hopping in there. If you're not, there's a link in the show notes or description box, depending on where you're watching or listening. And please take a moment to check out the sponsors to help support the channel. And you can see all of our other content at freight360.net, including the Freight Broker Basics course. All right. We'll get right into it without further ado. Here's the email here, the question. So this is a motor carrier. All right. And he says, hey, Nate, on August 13th, we had a job contract to move some stuff from Paris, California to Vernon, California. We were supposed to pick it up at 11 a.m. and deliver it by 4 p.m. the same day. So just one pick, one drop, same day transit. Everything was all set. Emails were exchanged, and it seemed pretty straightforward until we showed up. We got there at just before 2 o'clock, but the receiver, Brian, had no space for our drop. The broker knew about the issue and tried to email us, get empty. But after waiting for about 2 hours, Brian told us he still couldn't take the delivery. By then, the broker couldn't do much, and we ended up having to secure the load overnight. So basically, to take you back, it was supposed to be there by 4. They got there 2 hours early. The receiver had no room. So now we're dealing with this driver never got unloaded, and they have to stay there overnight. So now the next morning at 5:38 a.m., we contacted the broker to either pick up his cargo or give us new receiving confirmation and an updated rate confirmation for the additional services and let us know when there would be space. But the broker ghosted us for hours without a solution. He initially wanted us to redeliver for free, but we had to stand our ground. We asked him multiple times to pick up his cargo. He kept refusing and tried to force us to redeliver for just $100. In the end, we kept the freight in our truck from August 13th to August 15th, 2024. We delivered with clean bills, but right after, he reported us on My Carrier Portal and TIA Watchdog. These platforms are known for their power in the industry. Reports like these can really hurt small operators who rely on the spot market. I'm all for keeping the bad apples out and protecting clients and shippers' cargo, but these platforms need to make sure they're used correctly and fairly. If they're misused, they could become useless. I'm not asking anyone to take sides. I just think this is a problem in the industry that so many can relate to. Brokers and carriers, owner-operators included, could definitely learn from this. We need to find a way to handle these situations better so everyone can benefit. All right, so
that I understand this. Yeah, so like the carrier went to go deliver the load like normal, and they didn't have space. So there's a layover to the next day. The part I was a little bit lost on was it basically just the conflict because the broker didn't want to pay the layover fee?
So this sounds to me, there's two sides of this story, and that's why I wanted to break it down, right? The broker is basically saying, you held our load hostage, and the carrier is saying, you're trying to not pay us for doing our job. It was supposed to deliver on, let's see, let's look at what day of the week this was. August 13th would have been a Tuesday. All right, so it was supposed to deliver on a Tuesday. It ended up not delivering until Thursday, so 2 days later. All right, so the carrier. So I'm going to tell you where I think. Well, first of all, let me give you, Ben. You and I had a conversation yesterday with Alex from Expedite All, and we're going to have him on the show later this month, and we'll talk about some of this stuff. But he brought up, and I won't name names on the vetting site. It's not any of the ones that we ever endorse, but he mentioned that, like, you get some of these smaller, like, so they do like a lot with Sprinter vans and it's Expedite stuff. And the issue is that, like, some of the vetting platforms, they're really designed for full truckload, right? And if you're dealing with like a Sprinter van who's not held to the same standards and regulations as a full 18-wheeler,
right?
Some of these vetting sites are going to look bad. And the example he uses, like, you got this carrier that basically is like, I'm being told that no broker is going to load me because I'm being rated as an F on this, we won't name it, vetting site. And they're being rated as an F which sounds really bad to any broker. but they're being rated poorly because they're trying to do a one size fits all vetting thing, right? And the same thing applies with if there's a report done on like Highway, for example. What I like about Highway is that if you see a report of double brokering or hostage load, you have the option to contact the publisher and get their story. All right. Highway also has the ability to, they're going to vet reports before they publish them to make sure that someone's not just fraudulently, putting these bad reports out there for the universe. The same thing goes with like Google reviews. Whenever my brokerage that I work for, Pierce Worldwide Logistics, whenever we get a bad Google review, we answer every single one of them. And I can tell you every single time, if our rep was in the wrong, we make that carrier whole. If the carrier was in the wrong, we respond to it and make it known that this carrier is leaving a, basically an unwarranted
derogatory,
a bad, their review is not substantiated. Okay.
Yes.
Now back to this issue here. All right. The broker is in the wrong for there's a big breakdown in communication here. Clearly, the broker didn't communicate. And again, I'm going just based off of the information we have in this email. I don't know what actually happened. We're taking this at face value. All right. The broker didn't do much to take care of this carrier as far as the scheduling. The carrier was there early. I get it. If they got there 2 hours early, then that's kind of on them, right? But after that point, if the receiver is saying like, we don't have room, and the carrier's not, or the broker's not doing anything about it, now the broker has some responsibility here, in my opinion.
For sure.
You could be talking detention initially, and then when the receiver says, come back the next morning, that's definitely a layover, right?
For sure. 100%.
Right? We're not talking a free redelivery the next morning. We're talking like, this could be $500. It depends, what it is. If, is it a specialty, like RGN or something like that, or it's just standard dry van? Who knows? But now what confuses me here is the broker refuses to, agree to a reasonable rate to redeliver. Yep. And now the carrier is deciding, well, I'm just not going to deliver it until you give me the rate confirmation that I want to see. This is where we get into like a gray area. Yeah. Because we don't know when each person talked to each other, what the back and forth was, but the broker now has an argument that, well, you're holding my load hostage, right? I mean, there's an argument to be made on both sides here.
Correct.
Right? What we don't know is what ended up happening where they came to the agreement to then finally deliver it on Thursday. Was there a certain amount of money that was agreed to? No idea, right? We know it went from free redelivery to only $100 redelivery the next day to 2 days later, the carrier finally delivers it and then gets a bad report against them. So my advice to the carrier would be, don't work with that broker ever again. And if you have a bad report against you, I would respond to it in any way, shape, or form that you could.
I think
what is your take on this, Ben? This one, again, we don't have all the details, but this is the kind of stuff that will happen. We just did an episode on fraud on the podcast.
I've had a similar scenario happen a few times with a customer that we just fired. They had a detention policy of 4 hours free and $25 an hour after, which our rep didn't make us aware of. And we have a policy where we're going to pay you $50 an hour to the carrier after 2 hours free, right? And the shipper just would change the appointments without letting the broker know. So the truck would show up at 10, oh no, sorry, the appointment was moved till 3. And then it would take 6 hours to unload them. I was looking at these last week. There was at least a handful of these that were the carrier was there 8 or 9 hours and the shipper wanted to compensate them $50, right? 4 hours free and then $25 an hour for the next 3 hours. So it was 7 hours. They wanted to give them $75, right? So I made this and listen, we are going to use a industry standard detention policy in this scenario. We're not going to burn these carriers, even though the shipper isn't going to reimburse us, because I think that's the right thing to do. Then the customer argued and said well, that's not our fault. This is our policy. And ironically, the shipper later in the month is yelling and crying that they can't get enough of their product moved. And I jumped into the middle of it and started talking to the manager of it. And I said, listen, None of our carriers are willing to run more than one load with you guys because you say you have an appointment, you're moving them, and then you want to give them $25 for basically sitting there all day. Like, I'm paying them out of pocket a few $100s just to make it right, but they don't want to come back. And I don't want to send any more trucks to pick up any of your loads. Full stop. I'm like, we're just not going to work with you because I can't just eat $300 losses so you can accommodate, the loading dock or have issues scheduling and can't seem to like work that out. Like, we're not just going to incur this cost or just use a bunch of different carriers and beat them up and then just basically screw them on their time just to accommodate you guys. Like, this is an egregious policy. You guys know this. You guys either need to address this. This is why you can't get your cargo moved. Like, this is why you're running into issues.
So I'll add this in too. And the situation that the story we just told, I don't know how this would play out because we don't have all the details. But if you're a motor carrier and a brokerage is refusing to pay you for your services that you've performed, that is the reason why brokerages are required to have a bond or a trust.
So I have a question for you. Because
Yes.
I asked about this and I was told this wasn't correct, but I've heard different things. I've heard, though, that you can't file on the bond for like accessorial charges.
So, and that's why I'm curious what other discussions were there, what other agreements were there. But I've seen it in the past where I've seen like I've seen how the bond,
the back and forth
claim plays out, and we've talked about it here and there. But here's typically what happens. The bond company, they're not there to like hear your pissing match back and forth. They're there to look at facts and then figure out from the facts who is responsible to pay what amount, right? And they will say, broker, give me all your details. Okay, cool. Carrier, give me all your details. Okay, cool. All right, broker, you owe this money. Or carrier, you're not entitled to this money. And it usually ends just like that. They're not going to go back and forth. It's basically it's like a claims adjustment for an auto accident. Like,
Yep.
if the insurance company denies the claim and says that no, this policy doesn't cover that, you can't just, say, well, you can't appeal it 30 times just because you want, the policy to magically pay out.
Cover this.
So yeah, that's another option too, is if you have documented, detailed communication that says they agreed to X, Y, and Z, there's nothing wrong with you going to file on the bond. It doesn't guarantee you're going to get paid, but
it's an option.
Another option you can go towards.
And this is what I suggested. I think I answered a YouTube question where I said, look, like from the carrier point of view, and like we have clients that are carriers, and I say like, hey, if you're working with a new brokerage, like it takes 30 seconds to ask, hey, what is your detention policy and what's your layover policy with this customer? Can you just email that over with the rate con, right? Ask beforehand. Asking when it's going on is far harder, and now they have leverage and you're negotiating and there's a lot of tension. When you're booking the load, just ask those two questions, have them put it over in a quick email. Now you don't have to negotiate it. They've stated the terms. And again, if they try to pull some shady thing, like it seems like was kind of happening where the broker for sure at least didn't want to compensate them reasonable amount for a whole day layover, then I would email like their manager or reach out to the brokerage. And like most brokerages have more than one person and somebody or a supervisor or a carrier operations team that will address this and then address the broker for doing it, right? Like I know the big companies for sure do. And again, like having it in writing, I think is your best recourse ahead of time.
Yep.
So at least you're not negotiating this on the fly.
Yeah. And so, to add to that, let's say the broker, and it doesn't sound like that was the case, that this is the case here, but if the broker is the reason for, if the broker screwed up the appointment time, and the customer doesn't honor detention because it wasn't their fault, the broker should be then liable for that. But again, you should have that conversation like, hey, what is the policy for detention and layover? How many free hours, etc. But he did say here in the email, they had no space for us to deliver it. The broker knew about it and tried to help us. But then the receiver said, we can't take it. So it sounds like it was on the customer for not having the available space, and the customer should have authorized layover, redelivery fees, etc. what might have happened here is the broker's like, I'm not going to risk my customer relationship, so I'm going to screw the carrier here. And it sounds like that's roughly what happened if we have all the details here. What we don't know is, did this carrier threaten to hold the load hostage? It doesn't sound like he did, but we don't have all of the details. So I'm not going to name the carrier or the broker here because, again, we're not. This isn't like the what's that show? Jerry Springer. It's not the Jerry Springer show, right?
You know what else I would say too? And I've thought about this a lot, even in the past few months with tiring and other stuff, is that like, I heard this a long time ago. I don't remember where I heard it, but it was like this quote that was like, your success in life is determined by the number of difficult conversations you're willing to have, right? And that like always kind of stuck with me because I think that's true in all of our lives, but for sure freight brokers, right? Because in that scenario, all I'm thinking is like that broker more than likely just didn't want to call the shipper and hold them accountable and say like, listen, he was supposed to be unloaded yesterday at 10. We held him over till today. Like we got to give the guy at least $350 for layover or $250 or something reasonable. Either didn't or wasn't willing to have that conversation because he's worried about what the shipper's going to say. And he's so worried about getting more business that he can't defend the carrier. And I think that's part of our job. You need to absolutely stand behind your carriers when they're doing what you ask them to do. You need to be able to go to the shippers and have that hard conversation, or you're not going to last in the industry because the carriers don't want to work with you. You need both. Right. And on the other hand, right, it's like, or to your point, maybe the shipper did operate and say, yeah, we'll give you the $350. And then the broker tried to make the $200 off it or $150 off it instead of giving all the money to the carrier, neither of which I think are good. And correct. I don't think brokers should be doing those things for sure.
Exactly. All right, good stuff. We got two other shorter questions we'll just answer real quick. Next one here is, I need broker insurance or any recommendations. It's been so hard to find. Insurance. I mean, it shouldn't be very hard to find, and you shouldn't be hard to give your money to somebody to use their services. Correct. Or get an insurance policy written. What I will say is, if you are a freight broker looking to get insurance, we always recommend a insurance brokerage. You just put in there,
this is Cameron Pescia's. Yeah, we've had him on the show. He was actually going to be on this week. He's going to work on getting us some updates on policies related to fraud, and then we'll have him on. But we'll put a link in the show notes where you can just literally use this. We have a good relationship with them. He can get you some pretty good pricing team-wise, get you some options. That's who we've been recommending.
Valley Trucking Insurance, yeah. And he's a insurance broker, right? So what's good is he can go, and other insurance brokers, which we recommend, they're good for two main reasons. Number one, they can go shop the market and get your policies underwritten by any insurance carrier that is the best option for you. So they might get you a contingent cargo policy from one underwriter. They might get you a general liability policy from another one. They might get you a contingent auto from another one. I mean, that's the best thing is they can shop the market versus if it's like, I'll just use like Allstate, for example, right? Someone that works for Allstate can only sell you an Allstate policy. But if they're a broker, they can shop the market just like us as freight brokers can shop the market and find you the best available options. The second reason that insurance brokers are really good is they can advise you based on your situation what policies they would recommend for you. They can give you guidance on, hey, if you're more price sensitive, here's an option and here's where its limits are. Or if, hey, based on your customer's requirement, we can't go that route. You're going to need to go this, with this option because it has to meet your customer's requirements, things like that. So they're knowledgeable and they have a lot of options. So that's my answer there. So Valley Trucking Insurance is our recommendation that we just dropped there for you guys. Last one. Do I need two different MC numbers for brokering freight and physically moving freight on my own truck? The short answer is going to just be yes, with the caveat being if you have a dual authority. So if your authority is for broker and carrier, then you're fine. But this question makes me think it's an owner-operator that's looking to get into brokerage. Most of the time, you're going to see them under two different MC numbers, two different authorities.
if you only have an asset authority, you cannot broker freight under that. That is illegal. You do not have the author. That would be fraudulent brokering, which is what the TIA labels it. Because double brokering would be taking a load and then using that brokerage authority to rebroker it. That would be double brokering. But if you don't have the license to broker, it would be just fraudulent brokering without a license. So yes. And you should also make sure that you're representing yourself in the proper terminology and entity. So if you're speaking to a freight broker and you're looking to put it on your truck, you should be representing yourself as an asset-based company. If you're speaking to a shipper and you don't intend to haul it on your own truck, you should be representing yourself as the freight brokerage entity, since that is the authority that you will use to broker that load out to a third-party carrier. Anything else on that point? You can get into some messy situations if you represent yourself as an asset-based company and then rebroker.
For sure. And for sure, in the procurement side, when you're getting onboarded, the agreements are going to specifically state one or the other. You need to make sure that if you're onboarding with a brokerage, that you're not being determined to be a motor carrier and vice versa.
Contract language is there. Good stuff. Great questions. Keep sending them our way, and we will do our best to answer as many as we can. Any final thoughts, Ben?
Whether you believe you can or believe you can't, you're right.
And until next time, go Bills.